My name is Elena Sinclair. I'm 33 years old, and on the morning of my cousin Jacob's funeral, I stood in the back of St. Mark's Cathedral, like an outsider. The whole town showed up that day. Blue uniforms everywhere, rows of gleaming badges, dress shoes polished to mirror perfection, and American flags fluttering with precision-timed sorrow. The altar was draped in black. The choir hummed something holy and haunting. And me? I was placed behind the last row of pews, somewhere between the floral arrangements and the overflow seating. No reserved seat. No name tag. No recognition. Only a cold look from my father, who turned briefly from the casket and muttered under his breath, "Stand back there, Elena. Let the real officers grieve. This is about Jacob." He adjusted his old sheriff's badge, the one he still wore like it meant something in retirement, and scanned me up and down like I'd ruined the photo just by breathing. "You're not one of us. You're just an operator." That word burned. Just an operator. As if the badge tucked into the lining of my coat didn't exist. As if the federal clearance in my wallet was just a sticker prize from a cereal box. As if the past 8 years hadn't happened. I could feel my FBI credentials pressing into my ribs, invisible to them, but so very real. That morning, my name was nowhere in the program. No mention of the cousin who grew up with Jacob, the one who used to dig holes in the backyard with him, plan constellations under summer skies, and talk about a different kind of justice. I was background noise, furniture, a logistical oversight, and still, I said nothing, because I'd learned long ago silence was easier than trying to earn respect from people who'd already decided you didn't deserve it. Jacob had been everything they wanted in a Sinclair: loyal, loud, brave in a way that made headlines. He made detective at 27, led 3 raids, got a commendation for bravery. He was the son Dad never had, even though I was sitting right there, doing more behind closed doors than most of them had done in a lifetime on patrol. But they didn't care about intelligence reports. They cared about boots on asphalt, about bullets, not briefings. And so, for years, I kept my real job hidden. To them, I was working in admin, somewhere behind a keyboard. I let them believe that. Until the day 3 men in black suits walked down the aisle of St. Mark's, past the solemn rows of officers, through the haze of incense and grief. And one of them locked eyes with me and said, clearly, loudly for everyone to hear, "Agent Sinclair, with us, now." Silence crashed like thunder. Every eye turned. My mother dropped her hymnal. My father's mouth opened. And for the first time in my life, no sound came out, because in that moment, the girl who had been dismissed, downplayed, and denied her place had just been summoned by the Department of Justice, and no one could pretend not to see me anymore. Let me rewind. Let me tell you how we got here, to a church full of uniforms, to my father's stunned silence, to the moment my carefully protected secret burned away in front of an entire town. You see, growing up in the Sinclair family was like growing up in a police station. There were codes for everything. Tone meant more than words, and the only acceptable emotion was duty. My grandfather was a beat cop who never took a day off. My father, sheriff by 32. My uncles, cousins, even the women married into the family, dispatchers, medics, precinct clerks. There was a rule in our house. You don't cry. You report. The family dinners felt more like debriefings. My dad would place his badge on the table before every meal. A quiet symbol that the uniform always came first, even above family. Jacob? He thrived in that world. He was the golden boy from the start. I still remember his 3rd grade career day. He wore our dad's old academy shirt that hung down to his knees. Said, "I want to catch bad guys just like Uncle Dean." Everyone clapped. Me? I brought a poster about forensic linguistics. They asked if I meant court reporting. I was the quiet one. I read case files in the dark while Jacob played tag in the backyard. I memorized FBI protocols while he memorized handcuff techniques. At 9, I noticed a misprint on one of Dad's crime scene photos and pointed out that a suspect's timeline didn't match. You know what Dad said? "Don't overthink it, Elena. Real work happens on the street, not behind a desk." I learned then what he valued: brawn over brains, visibility over impact. So I stopped showing what I saw. I tucked my observations into margins. I stopped correcting mistakes. I just observed. Until one day someone from a different world noticed. But before that, I did what I had to do to survive. I played the game. I applied for a dispatcher job at the precinct, and for the first time in my life, Dad nodded like I wasn't a complete disappointment. "Good job," he said. "Close to home. Real work. Steady." He said it like I'd finally stopped embarrassing him. But while I was taking 911 calls, I was also analyzing them, building heat maps of crime, cross-referencing names, spotting patterns no one else bothered to see. Eventually, one of my breakdowns got passed up the chain, then further, until one day, a woman in a navy suit and mirrored sunglasses sat across from me in a diner and said, "Ever considered joining the Bureau?" I said yes, and I never told my family, because I knew how the story would go. They'd say it wasn't real police work, that it was fancy data and buzzwords, that until I wore a beat cop's badge, it didn't count. So I let them believe I was dispatch, let Dad dismiss my career at every holiday, let Jacob be the only one who knew. He used to say, "One day when you walk into a room and everyone stands, I hope Dad's there to see it." He never got that chance, but Dad did, at Jacob's funeral, at the worst moment of our lives. My truth exploded in front of everyone. If you've ever felt overlooked, if your family told you your dreams were soft, your path wasn't real, your work wasn't enough, then keep listening. Because the rest of this story, it doesn't end in that church. It starts there, with my father's stunned silence, and everything that followed when the badge I'd hidden finally became impossible to ignore. I was 6 the first time I realized that my last name didn't belong to me. It belonged to the badge. Not a real badge, of course. Not yet. But the idea of one. The gleaming silver rectangle with our family name etched into it like some holy relic passed from man to man. I say man because that's how it always was. The Sinclairs didn't pass down stories. We passed down ranks. My earliest memory isn't of birthday candles or bedtime stories. It's of standing at the top of the staircase, watching my father polish his service revolver at the kitchen table, while Jacob, only 10, sat beside him, wide-eyed and silent, like a soldier being readied for war. "The day you earn this," Dad said, setting the badge next to the gun, "is the day you become someone." Jacob nodded like he'd just been knighted. I stood in the hallway holding a crayon and a half-finished drawing of a girl in a spacesuit. I wanted to ask, "Can I become someone too?" But I already knew the answer. In our house, the air always smelled like leather, gun oil, and respectability. The walls were lined with framed commendations, retirement plaques, faded photographs of men in uniform standing shoulder to shoulder like saints carved in granite. There were no fairy tales in the Sinclair household, just stories that started with, "Back in '82 when we took down that drug house." My mother, bless her heart, tried to give me softness. She packed my lunches with handwritten notes, tucked me in with old nursery rhymes, and whispered things like, "It's okay to be gentle." But her voice was a footnote. Dad's voice was law. And his law had one rule: don't embarrass the name, which meant no talking back, no crying in public, and no dreams that couldn't be pinned to a chain and worn over the heart. By age 10, Jacob was already in training, police explorers, ride-alongs, firearm safety. He knew radio codes better than multiplication tables. And me? I like to ask questions. Annoying ones, like, why did the break-in reports all happen on Wednesdays? Or how come that robbery suspect is left-handed in every sketch? When I found a discrepancy in one of Dad's reports and pointed it out, he didn't say thank you. He said, "Jesus, Elena, you've got a good imagination. That's not a compliment." I learned to keep quiet. But the thing is, I couldn't stop seeing patterns. I'd stay up past bedtime, reading his old case files under the covers with a flashlight. The crimes weren't what fascinated me. It was the logic, the rhythm, the way you could line up statements, times, alibis, and suddenly the truth would emerge like a ghost in the fog. Once I caught a detail in a blurry photograph. The suspect's watch was on the wrong wrist. "He's not left-handed," I whispered. I showed it to my mom. She gasped. "Dad?" He barely looked. "It's not your job to dissect evidence," he said. "It's your job to stay out of it." So I did, publicly at least. By the time I reached high school, I had mastered the Sinclair survival strategy. 1. Keep your head down. 2. Don't outshine Jacob. 3. And never, ever let them see you want something they don't understand. I joined the yearbook club instead of mock trial, took biology instead of criminal justice, smiled politely when Dad joked, "Maybe one day you'll be the dispatcher who tells Jacob where to go." He laughed like it was funny. I laughed like I wasn't bleeding inside. Everything shifted senior year. I got into Georgetown. Full ride, criminology track, behavioral analysis. When I told Dad, he raised his eyebrows and said, "So, you want to be a profiler now? Watch one too many FBI shows?" I nodded, swallowed the lump in my throat. "Well," he said, "if that doesn't work out, dispatch is always hiring." The day my acceptance letter came, Jacob was accepted into the academy. We had a joint celebration, but only one of us got a speech. Only one of us got a toast. "To Jacob Sinclair," Dad said, raising his glass, "the next badge in the family line." Mom nudged him and whispered something. "Oh, right," he added. "And Elena's off to college, big city, good for her." Everyone clapped. I smiled until my face hurt. The night before I left, Jacob came into my room. He sat at the edge of my bed in silence for a long time. Then he said, "They don't see it now, Elle, but someday you're going to outrank all of us." I scoffed. "They think I'm just a nerd with a backpack." "You're a goddamn ghost with X-ray vision," he said, smirking. "You see stuff nobody else can, including them." Then he hugged me. "Just promise me one thing." "What?" "When you finally make it, when the whole world knows what you can do, don't forget the little people who always believed in you. Like you, especially me." I never forgot, but I did have to bury the truth, because the years that followed were full of secrets, silence, and strategy. And that's where we go next. I arrived at Georgetown in August with 2 overstuffed duffel bags, a sharp navy blazer I'd borrowed from my mom, and a name that still felt like it came with an asterisk. "Sinclair? Any relation to Sheriff Dean Sinclair?" a professor asked during orientation. I forced a polite smile. "That's my father." He nodded. "Good man. Tough rep. I'm sure you've got big shoes to fill." That's the thing about legacy. It always walks into the room before you do. But for the first time in my life, I was somewhere they didn't just see the badge. They saw my work. And slowly, I began to believe in something I never dared consider back home. That maybe I wasn't broken. Maybe I'd just been caged. The first class that changed me wasn't flashy. No dramatics, no mock crime scenes, just a seminar called criminal cognition and deviance. Sounds boring, right? But on day 1, Professor Langley put up a series of surveillance photos from a grocery store theft ring, the kind of grainy black and white stills I'd grown up seeing on Dad's kitchen table. "Take 5 minutes," he said. "Tell me what you notice." People scribbled aimlessly, body posture, car types, timestamps. Me? I saw something else. One woman in every photo had her wedding ring switched between hands. A man in a red hat always picked an exit closest to the blind spot, even when it meant going the long way around. Receipts in the background time-stamped locations in 2 cities that overlapped during a string of unrelated burglaries. "They're running parallel ops," I said aloud, using misdirection. 2 crews posing as one. Langley looked at me like I'd grown wings. "Miss Sinclair, have you done this kind of work before?" No, not officially. But I'd spent half my childhood solving crimes no one asked me to. Word spread quickly in the department. "She's got a profiler's mind," people whispered. "The quiet one. But she sees." I got invited to think tanks, asked to consult on student-led simulations, even had a research assistantship my second year with a team designing algorithmic models for cross-jurisdictional data analysis. They treated me like I belonged. No badge, no family name, just skill. Real recognition for the first time in my life came not from what I wore, but from what I saw. Meanwhile, back home, it was like none of it mattered. Every Sunday call felt like a rerun. "Jacob's leading a raid this week," Dad would say. "They called him in for gang suppression." "And you?" he'd ask. "Still reading papers and writing essays?" "We're building a predictive framework for serial targeting behavior," I'd reply. "Ah," he'd grunt. "Academic stuff. Well, keep at it. Maybe you'll get a job with the DMV or something when you're done." Every word was a leash, so I stopped calling as often. Senior year, I got shortlisted for the Bureau's Pathways internship program, one of the most competitive tracks for future field agents. It was everything. I didn't tell my parents, not because I wanted to hide, but because I didn't want to explain why it mattered. Didn't want to hear, "The FBI's not real law enforcement, sweetheart." Didn't want to see the smirk that always followed. So instead, I told them I was looking at communications roles. They nodded approvingly. "That's a good fit? Safe? Good benefits?" I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. That summer, I started my internship at the Washington field office. I expected to be fetching coffee, printing forms, watching. Instead, I was in the war room by the second week, cross-referencing case files, creating suspect matrices, and catching a pattern in a string of kidnappings that had eluded 2 teams. Agent Mallory, my mentor, pulled me aside one afternoon after a long strategy session. "Sinclair, your instinct is scary good. Where'd you learn to read people like that?" I shrugged. "My dad's a cop. Taught me what not to say." She laughed, then leaned in. "You ever think about Quantico, the real track?" The words hit me like lightning. "I thought you had to be more physical, more aggressive." "You'd be surprised how far your brain gets you when you're the one building the case files everyone else runs on." I said yes. By the end of that summer, my application was already in. Within 6 months, I had the clearance letter, and by the following year, I was headed to Quantico. Full ride, full commitment. No one at home knew. Not Jacob, not Mom, certainly not Dad. Instead, at dinner, I said, "I'm transferring to a federal dispatcher's post. Civilian side, more stable." Dad's eyes lit up like I'd just won the lotto. "That's practical. Good benefits, government pension." I smiled and packed for Quantico in silence. The academy was brutal. Physically, mentally, psychologically. I failed my first firearms test, cried in the bathroom after my first defensive training, got shoved to the floor during a nighttime drill, and bruised 3 ribs. But I never quit, because for the first time, quitting wouldn't just mean giving up on a dream, it would mean proving him right. And I was done doing that. By graduation, I was one of 3 women recruited into the Behavioral Threat Unit, a counterterrorism division that specialized in identifying patterns before they became explosions. I had my badge, my clearance, my mission, but I also had a family who thought I was answering phones somewhere in a windowless office. And I wasn't ready to change that. Not yet. Back in D.C., I was Agent Sinclair. I had clearance levels that could silence a room, field credentials that had more weight than any badge on my father's wall, and a seat at the same table with analysts twice my age. I was stationed with a hybrid intel unit focusing on regional cartel activities, tracking money, weapons, and movements along the Eastern Corridor. We were the brains before the boots, the whisper before the raid. Each day started before sunrise and ended sometime after midnight. I mapped logistics networks, cross-matched alias names, flagged irregular shipments coming in through minor ports, and sometimes got yanked into field briefings when a sting required deeper pattern analysis. My team trusted me. They stopped calling me the quiet one and started saying things like, "Get Sinclair on it. She sees what no one else sees." But no matter how much I grew into the badge, my phone calls home never changed. On Sundays, Dad would still ask if I was adjusting to that desk job. Mom would wonder if I had time to decorate my apartment. And Jacob was the only one who ever slipped in a question with weight behind it. "So how's the real job?" he asked once over speakerphone while driving his cruiser through a quiet shift. "The one you don't tell anyone about." I paused. "What makes you think there's a real job?" He laughed. "Because you talk like a Fed and dodge like a spook." He never pressed for more, just said, "When the time's right, I hope I'm there." I didn't realize how much I was clinging to that sentence until I couldn't anymore. 2 years into my posting, we got a lead on a trafficked weapons route flowing from Baltimore into Philly, with suspected branches extending south toward Georgia. The paperwork said we were chasing shadow networks. What it didn't say was that this exact setup had mirrored intel we found 5 months earlier, in an operation Jacob had been tangentially assigned to back home. He didn't know I was involved. I didn't know he was being rotated into a multi-agency task force that was building pressure near the same pipeline. Compartmentalization is a cruel thing. It protects national interests, but it also separates brothers and sisters fighting the same war from opposite ends of the silence. I followed my orders, built case files, wrote reports, presented threat briefings to higher-ups, and never once said my cousin's name. Never asked if his precinct was one of the confirmed agencies. Never pushed for more details, because that would have required revealing what I'd spent years hiding. The night Jacob died, I was in a bunker-level ops room watching a video feed from a joint DEA bust go dark mid-transmission. The target location was outside Savannah. There was confusion, static, yelling, then radio silence. No confirmation, no names, just casualty reports and coded alerts filtering in without context. I found out the next morning from my mother's voicemail. He was gone. A bullet through his chest during a raid, died en route to the hospital. I listened to that message over and over, not because I didn't believe it, but because I needed to hear my mother say the words. I needed to hear the break in her voice, the silence on the line after she said, "Please come home." That's the problem with living 2 lives. When one explodes, you can't hide inside the other anymore. I took emergency leave, booked the earliest flight back to Pennsylvania, and stared out the window the whole way down, knowing full well that the operation that had taken Jacob's life bore my fingerprints. Not directly, not intentionally, but the data I analyzed, the maps I constructed, the patterns I connected, they had informed what became his final assignment. And I hadn't known. because I'd kept them in the dark, and in doing so, I'd kept myself blind too. The house hadn't changed. Same porch swing, same black and white framed photo of Dad in uniform on the wall, same scent of gun oil and coffee, and something old and unspoken. I walked in and no one said much. Dad was hunched over a table, sorting old photos of Jacob into a memorial display. Mom was pacing, red-eyed and trembling but refusing to sit. I set my bag down and whispered, "I'm here." Dad looked up, nodded once, then went back to arranging medals. No hug, no acknowledgement of the flight, the grief, the sudden collapse of everything. His only words, "The service will be full honors. The department's handling it. Try not to draw attention." Try not to draw attention. As if I hadn't spent my entire life training for exactly that. The next 3 days were a blur of logistics. Flowers, guest lists, programs, chaplains, uniformed visitors stopping by to offer condolences, and more silent judgment. I watched it all from the edge of the room, invisible, unless someone needed something filed or delivered or ordered. I kept my badge tucked inside my jacket, wore black, said the right things. At one point, I saw my name on the printed memorial program, listed once under surviving family, not as a speaker, not as a contributor, just a line between niece and cousin. That night, while the house finally slept, I stepped outside with my secure line phone and called Agent Murray, my direct supervisor. "It was one of ours," I said quietly. "Sinclair, don't sugarcoat it. We gave them the map. They walked into it. He died because we didn't know each other's assignments." There was a long pause. "We've confirmed cartel presence at the funeral," he said. "They'll be watching, probably looking to identify who was in the chain." "And me?" "You're not a civilian anymore." I stared out into the night, into the yard where Jacob and I used to pretend we were astronauts. "Then I'll do what I was trained to do. Even if it means revealing yourself?" I didn't answer, because the truth was, part of me had been waiting for this moment, not just to act, but to finally be seen. The church was full before the bells even rang. Rows of officers in navy and charcoal gray stood like sentinels. The scent of polished leather and starched uniforms clung to the pews, mixing with lilies and incense. At the front of the aisle, Jacob's casket sat draped in an American flag, his hat resting neatly on top, 2 folded gloves beside it. White, perfect, lifeless. I stepped inside through the side entrance. Not as Agent Sinclair, not even as Elena, Jacob's cousin. Just a shape in a black coat, eyes forward, hands clasped behind my back, keeping my profile low. "Back row," my father said without turning. His voice came from instinct, not malice, like he was issuing orders on autopilot. "Officers and department leads up front, family behind them. You stay in the back." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I had a role to play. It wasn't just about hiding anymore. It was about protecting the people in this room, even the ones who'd never protected me. I moved toward the rear pew, scanning as I went. Most faces I recognized: local cops, state investigators, a handful of retired brass. But 3 didn't fit. 3 men in suits sat just outside the periphery, on opposite sides of the sanctuary. Not overdressed, not out of place, but off. They weren't here to mourn. They were here to watch. Murray had warned me this might happen, that the cartel, losing ground and blood, would send eyes to Jacob's memorial, not to retaliate, but to assess, identify who was involved, take mental snapshots of who stood too close to truth. I pulled out my phone, typed out a silent message to the bureau. 3 potential watchers, position stable, eyes moving. And then I sat down. A choir sang something in Latin. A pastor muttered blessings in low, rehearsed tones. The first eulogy began. Jacob's partner, Detective Ruiz, voice thick with sorrow. He told a story about their first week in the field, about how Jacob had jumped into a frozen canal chasing a suspect because he didn't believe in fences. There was laughter, tears, nods of solidarity. And still, I kept watching the three men. One adjusted his cuff, a signal maybe. The other scrolled briefly on a phone. The third stared at the badge draped over the casket longer than anyone else had, not with grief, but calculation. Then it was my father's turn to speak. He walked to the pulpit like he was stepping onto a podium after a championship. His spine straightened. His voice dropped into that familiar, commanding cadence that once made rookies in our hometown stand 2 inches taller. My nephew Jacob was a Sinclair through and through, brave, bold, born to wear the badge. He paused for effect, glancing at the rows of uniforms before continuing. He believed in real service, on the street, not behind a desk. I felt the sting before he even said it. This generation needs more Jacobs, he added. Not keyboard clerks and analysts who think watching a screen is the same as stopping a bullet. A few heads turned. Some looked puzzled. Others smirked. No one stood up for me. They never had. And I stayed quiet. Because this wasn't my time. Not yet. As the next hymn began, I leaned forward, just slightly, and whispered to the officer seated beside me, someone I recognized from the state's anti-narcotics unit. Third man from the left, brown suit, faint scar over right eye. Watch him. The officer blinked, then nodded. The shift was beginning. At the back of the church, one of the watchers stood and began inching toward the exit. They were preparing to leave, to report back, to vanish. I tapped my phone and sent the signal. Movement initiated. Request tactical containment. Quiet. 3 rows up, I saw Agent Murray appear, blending into a group of mourners like a shadow. 2 other agents entered from opposite sides. No commotion, no flashing lights, just stillness, timed with purpose. And then he said it. From behind me, from the center of the aisle, from a voice I knew as well as my own. Agent Sinclair, we need you. 3 words, clear, unapologetic. The entire church went silent. I rose, walked forward, and every head turned. Gasps, whispers. My mother stood slowly, hand to her mouth. My father's jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth would crack. I passed the row of stunned officers and moved to Agent Murray's side. 3 observers, I said, voice steady. Targets matching cartel identifiers. Confirmation pending, but patterns fit. He nodded, already moving to intercept. The front pew, the place I was never allowed to sit, now stared at me as if I were someone they'd never met. Because I wasn't who they thought I was. And I never had been. I wasn't the girl in the background. I wasn't the one answering phones. I wasn't the one who just helped where she could. I was the one who saw the storm coming while they were watching the horizon. And now, I was the storm. The silence that followed my name being called was not the kind you find in reverence. It was razor thin, fragile, full of disbelief and rapidly shifting comprehension. One of the men in the back tried to slip toward the side exit. Agent Peters intercepted without fanfare, offering what looked like a consoling arm around his shoulder. The kind of body language mourners use when grief becomes too heavy. But I knew better. That grip was steel. And that exit wasn't freedom. It was containment. Inside the church, the air changed. The priests, caught off guard, hesitated between verses. Officers whispered in confusion, some rising from their seats with the muscle memory of men who had spent their lives following orders, now unsure whose those orders belonged to. I stood near the pulpit, next to Agent Murray, who handed me a tablet with the feed of the operation. All 3 cartel observers were being quietly removed from the premises, each one flanked by bureau agents in plain clothes, their faces expressionless, movements precise. "Clean and quiet," he murmured to me. "Exactly how you trained it." I nodded, but my throat was dry, because it wasn't the operation that rattled me. It was the aftermath. I turned slightly, meeting the eyes of officers who had once looked through me. Now they stared as if I were a ghost. My father hadn't moved. His knuckles were white, clenching the edges of the pew so tightly I thought the varnish might crack. His mouth opened, but the words refused to come. I saw it in his face, the war between disbelief and recognition. The truth didn't need my voice anymore. It was standing in front of him. After a long, dragging moment, Captain Rivera, Jacob's commanding officer, approached, his hand outstretched. "Special Agent Sinclair," he said formally, in front of everyone. "On behalf of the department, thank you for keeping the memorial safe and for honoring Jacob the way you did." My father looked like he had been slapped, because Rivera was one of his own, and his respect wasn't cheap. "I only did what I was trained to do," I replied, my voice even, measured. "And what Jacob would have done if the roles were reversed." Rivera hesitated, then lowered his voice. "He always said you were the smartest one in the family. He just never explained why." He didn't have to. He saw me, even when no one else did. After Rivera stepped away, I walked down the center aisle, the same aisle I was once told to avoid, and approached the pew where my parents sat. Mom had tears in her eyes, hand over her mouth, shaking slightly. My father sat stiff, unmoving, as though the weight of his certainty had just cracked his spine. I paused beside him, not to rub it in, not to demand anything, just to stand there, exactly as I was, and let him see the full reality he had ignored for years. "You lied to me," he said eventually. His voice wasn't angry. It was hollow. "No," I answered. "You assumed. I just didn't correct you." He didn't respond, but the muscle in his jaw trembled. "I'll be outside," I told them both. I didn't wait for permission, because I didn't need it anymore. Outside, the wind had picked up. A few early raindrops flecked the marble steps, but the sky held back. A few officers had followed me, unsure if they should offer condolences or congratulations. I was still wearing my black coat, still technically in mourning. But now, I was the subject of whispers I could finally hear. "She's FBI? Since when? Did you know she was one of the analysts on the Dixon case? That profile? That was her." One of the younger detectives, the same one who had asked me earlier if I needed help finding a seat, now stood beside me, shifting awkwardly. "I had no idea," he said, almost apologetically. "They told us you were just family." "I am," I replied. "I'm both." He nodded slowly. "Guess you're what we all aim to be, huh? Quiet until it matters, loud when it counts." I didn't answer, because that was Jacob's line, not mine. Agent Murray stepped outside a few minutes later, tablet tucked under his arm, face unreadable. "All 3 are in custody. Local transport is en route. No civilian eyes noticed a thing." "Good," I said. "Jacob deserved clean." He looked at me carefully. "You okay?" "No." He nodded, like he understood that okay wasn't the goal. "Not today." "We'll debrief you formally in 2 days," he added. "But off the record, you handled that flawlessly. Washington will hear about it. I didn't care who heard what. I cared that Jacob's name would be safe, that the cartel wouldn't use his death to sow more damage, that for once I had done something my father couldn't diminish. "I'll see you in D.C., I said, then turned back toward the stone steps of the church. The wind had stopped. Inside, they were starting the final hymn. Officers began to file out, heads bowed, badges gleaming. Several of them looked at me now, not with pity or amusement, but with respect. And then, finally, my father emerged, alone. He stopped a few feet from me, looked older than I remembered, smaller, as if some invisible weight had finally slipped from his shoulders and taken the scaffolding of his pride with it. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I didn't want to know." "I know." 8 years?" he asked. "You were carrying that for 8 years?" "Longer, if you count the silence." He looked away, then back. "You should have told me." "I did," I said. "You just didn't hear it." He didn't argue, didn't deny. Instead, he said, Are you going back to D.C. after this?" "Yes." "Will I ever see you not in uniform?" I didn't answer right away. Then finally, "That depends. Are you ready to see me for who I really am?" He didn't reply. But he didn't walk away either. It was a beginning. Imperfect, but mine. 2 days after the funeral, I stepped back into the Bureau's briefing room like someone who'd been forged in fire. The lights buzzed overhead in a rhythm I knew by heart. Screens lined the walls, each flickering with data streams, intercepted communications, topographical maps, and threat models rendered in shades of red and blue. But it wasn't just the hum of surveillance feeds that greeted me. It was the silence when I entered, a silence of awareness, of acknowledgement. For the first time since I'd joined the task force, the room stopped for me. Agent Murray was already there, leaning over a table thick with folders. He looked up when I walked in, eyes narrowed slightly, as if he was assessing more than just my physical presence, as if he was searching for what had changed. "You're early," he said, but there was something like respect in his voice. "Am I?" "You buried your cousin 48 hours ago." "And?" "And most people wouldn't be back yet. Most people would take another week, maybe 2. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. My fingers spread out across the surface of the table, steady and deliberate. "I don't want time," I said. "I want targets." Murray gave a short, dry nod, then reached for the black folder beside him. He pushed it toward me. "You've got them." I opened it slowly. The header read, Operation Frostline, Phase 3. Authorization, confirmed. Lead Tactical Analyst, S.A.E. Sinclair. It took me a second to absorb the second line. "I'm lead?" "You earned it. We briefed the deputy director yesterday. He approved the handoff. It's yours now." My mouth felt dry. I'd been given lead before, in simulations, in special task assignments, but never on a sanctioned federal operation, never on something with this much scope and this many layers, never on something that had cost me this much personally. Operation Frostline wasn't just a takedown campaign, it was a coordinated dismantling, the kind of deep-rooted, multi-agency pursuit that took years to piece together and months to execute. It focused on a newly splintered branch of the Valmora cartel, now reaching farther inland after its Atlantic corridor had been disrupted. "Jacob's intel, it helped form this?" I asked, voice low. "His team's ground observations lined up with the trafficking routes you flagged 2 quarters ago," Murray replied. "It confirmed what we suspected. He didn't die for nothing, Sinclair." I shut the folder, then reopened it. Because this wasn't just my assignment. It was my vengeance. I spent the next 6 hours at my desk without looking up, building projections, running cross data, updating our known contact network. By nightfall, my analysis had evolved from target mapping to risk scoring. And my name wasn't just at the bottom of the paperwork anymore. It was stamped beside Mission Lead. A small digital ping came through on my secure terminal at 8:14 p.m. A message from Agent Desmond Murray. "We have authorization for first-wave arrests. Your call when we execute." I sat back in my chair, staring at the blinking cursor that awaited my reply. It was never about glory. It was about silence no longer protecting the wrong people. It was about finishing what Jacob unknowingly helped me start. And this time, they would all know who gave the order. The first wave launched at 5 o'clock a.m. sharp. 9 simultaneous arrests across 3 states. Tactical units moved with surgical precision, hitting stash houses, drop sites, and suspected financial fronts. No gunfire, no casualties, 14 suspects taken alive, 3 key couriers flipped within 12 hours. On paper, it was flawless. I stood in the control center at Quantico, watching as live feeds streamed across a multi-panel display wall. Agents in body armor moved through warehouses with their rifles lowered but steady. Drones hovered above rooftops, infrared lines blinking in ghostly red. Radios crackled and clipped confirmations. Alpha secured. Delta site clear. Packages recovered. Target 2-4 in custody. Minimal resistance. A cheer broke out from the operations team. I didn't smile. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt like I was doing Jacob proud. But something off lingered beneath the clean numbers. Too easy, too fast, too smooth. Murray walked over with a tablet in hand and an exhausted smile. "Congratulations, Sinclair. That's how you write a playbook." I took the tablet and flicked through the post-op reports. Everything checked out. Every movement matched the timeline. Every arrest matched the models we had built. And yet... "What's missing?" he asked, noticing the crease in my brow. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But something's off." He gave me a long look. "Your gut?" "My pattern recognition." Murray didn't laugh, didn't dismiss it, just nodded and walked back to the command board. Hours later, while combing through our updated network activity, I found it. Not a red flag, just a flicker. One address pinged twice during the operation, once in a flagged transport node we raided, and again 5 hours later, on a completely unrelated private server. The IP was scrubbed, the bounce trail was clean, but it shouldn't have existed at all. I sent the data to the Bureau's digital forensics team with a high-priority tag. By morning, they returned with their findings. "It was an internal mirror," the tech said. "Someone inside the Bureau cloned part of the Frostline intel, stripped identifiers, and funneled it through a ghost node." I stared at the screen. "Someone leaked?" He hesitated. "Not everything, but enough. Specific movement forecasts, safe house locations that were marked as inactive. Whoever it was knew how to make it look like a corrupted ghost log." "Until we cross-referenced post-op telemetry," I said. "Exactly." I turned and walked straight to Murray's office. When I laid out the findings, he didn't react, just leaned back slowly in his chair, eyes dark. "Any suspect?" "Not yet," I said. "But it's someone with mid to high-level access to the op database, someone who knew which nodes wouldn't trigger a security alert." Which suggests internal and trained. He rubbed his face, then stood. "You want to lead the internal audit?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes. This'll get ugly." "It's already ugly." He nodded once. "Then start with Tier 2 clearance holders. Pull log times, data access histories, secondary device syncs, and keep it off the books. For now, this stays between you, me, and 3 trusted agents." I turned back toward the war room, something cold and electric running through my veins. I had known how to hunt people for years, but this time, I wasn't chasing cartel foot soldiers. I was chasing a ghost hiding under our roof, and I was going to find them, not just because they betrayed the Bureau, not just because they put innocent lives at risk, but because they dared to leak intelligence during my command, and that made it personal. I locked myself in the secure archives lab for 3 nights straight. No noise, no windows, just the pale flicker of monitors and the low whir of encrypted servers whispering decades of secrets. My coffee tasted like battery acid. My eyes felt like they were pulsing behind my skull. But I didn't stop. I started with the Tier 2 clearance list, 73 names. I filtered by those with mirrored device permissions, then by those who had accessed Frost-line files within the 48-hour window before Phase 1. That brought it down to 15. I layered secondary filters, off-network device syncs, hidden pings to external shells, elevated access requests processed without supervisory signatures. 7. One more pass, behavioral anomalies, unexplained logins from remote locations, shift swaps that didn't match official reports, comms with known red-zoned keywords, even if encrypted. 3. And one of them made my stomach turn before I even clicked the name. R. Thorne. Robert Thorne. I stared at it like it might vanish if I blinked too long. Thorne. We had started in the same cohort at Quantico. He was brilliant, the kind of analyst who made connections so fast it felt supernatural, wore secondhand boots and sharp suits. Grew up in Detroit, son of a steelworker, worked his way up through local intel before joining the Bureau. He was the first person who ever said to me, "They underestimate you too, huh?" We weren't close, but we were something. Same seminars, same war rooms, same tired nights hunched over data maps, trying to trace wire transfers through shell companies and burner phones. I trusted him, and now his access logs were glowing red like a bloody fingerprint on my screen. I pulled every report he had touched in the past 90 days. Half of them were unrelated, but a handful, too many for coincidence, matched the peripheral files Frost-line was built on. He had been following the same pattern I had, and yet his name never showed up in strategy meetings, never submitted any official contributions to the operation, because he wasn't building it. He was watching it, and then, perhaps, feeding it. I pushed back from the desk, heart pounding. It didn't make sense. Not Thorne, not the guy who once slammed his fist on the table when our joint trafficking case got stonewalled. Not the guy who stayed up with me until 3 a.m., building a model to track cartel migration patterns through abandoned farm routes in Maryland. But the proof didn't care about how I remembered him. It was there. Mirrored access logs, ghost node bounces, IPs matching internal devices linked to his clearance ID. I could have handed it to Internal Affairs. I could have walked to Murray's office and dropped the hammer. But something about this wasn't clean. Something told me Thorne wasn't the end of it. He was the doorway. I dug deeper, cross-referenced his comm logs with personnel from outside our task force. 3 aliases pinged on encrypted signal chains, each matching burner devices previously flagged by DEA intel. I widened the search. 2 of those burners had been picked up by an NSA passive sweep 6 months ago, traced back to a low-level logistics front in Northern Virginia. A front we'd blacklisted after a raid went cold. A front that was owned, indirectly, by a shell company tied to the Valmora cartel. And then something else fell into place. That ghost server ping I noticed after the funeral? It had passed through an external switch node, and that node belonged to a law enforcement supply company based in Pittsburgh, a company whose client list included precincts Jacob had worked with during his final assignment. My blood went cold. Whoever was behind this wasn't just leaking files. They were watching the field, feeding intel that got my cousin killed. I stood up, my legs shaking harder than I expected. Because I wasn't just chasing a traitor anymore. I was staring down the possibility that my operation, the one I'd fought tooth and nail to lead, was built on tracks someone else had quietly been laying for months. I dialed Murray. He picked up on the first ring. "Talk," he said. "I've got a name," I replied. "Go." Thorne. A pause, then, "Shit. I don't think he's acting alone. Neither do I." There was something in his voice, sharp, clipped. "You knew?" "I suspected," he admitted, "but didn't want to poison your view without evidence. We've been watching his pattern for weeks. We just couldn't prove it. You can now. I'll have a warrant for a secure interview within the hour. You want to be in the room?" I stared at the board, at the knot forming in the center of the map I thought I understood. "I want to ask him myself. Elena, I need to hear why." "Okay," Murray said, "but be prepared. The first betrayal never feels the way you think it will." I hung up and stared at the name again. Thorne. We were supposed to be the ones they overlooked, the ones underestimated, underused, and underestimated again until we weren't. But he had chosen a different path. He had chosen to play ghost. And now I was going to smoke him out. The secure interview room was chilled, deliberately, as if to sap the comfort from the air. No windows, no clock, just a single table, 2 chairs, and the thrum of surveillance running through the walls like veins beneath concrete skin. A red light blinked above the camera in the corner. "Active recording." Thorne sat with his hands flat on the metal surface. No cuffs, no lawyers, just the calm arrogance of someone who didn't believe he'd lost. I stood on the other side of the one-way glass, watching for a full 5 minutes before I entered. Watching how he breathed, how he sat too still, how he didn't fidget like an innocent man would. Agent Murray stood behind me, arms crossed. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He pressed the intercom button. "Agent Sinclair, you're clear." I opened the door and stepped inside. Thorne looked up. The corners of his mouth lifted. "Elena," he said, like we were old friends running into each other at a bookstore. "Been a while." I sat across from him, laid my case file down, and opened it without responding. He let the silence stretch before adding, "I figured it'd be you. That caught me, I mean. You always had better eyes than the rest of them." I didn't look up. "You mirrored 3 levels of Frostline Ops into an encrypted offshore node." He tilted his head slightly. "I'm impressed. That wasn't an easy thread to follow. You leaked routes, you compromised safe houses, you let boots hit targets already vacated, you—" My voice caught, and I forced myself back into the professional tone, "got Jacob killed." His smile faltered for just a second, but it returned. "I didn't get anyone killed," he said. "I delayed them. I diverted pressure. It was the field teams who pressed forward before they were supposed to. That wasn't my call. Don't you dare hide behind technicalities." He leaned back in his chair. "You want motive," he said. "Fine. I want truth. Same thing." He clasped his hands together like he was about to recite scripture. "You know what they told me after Quantico? That I'd be a perfect analyst, that I'd never see field time, that I'd spend my whole career feeding data to some cowboy with a badge and a god complex." I said nothing. "They told me I didn't have the temperament. Too independent, too inquisitive. You got the same speech, didn't you?" I didn't answer. He already knew. "The difference," he said, voice softening, "is you played the long game. You bent just enough to pass. I refused. You sabotaged federal operations." I rerouted the future, he corrected. My fist clenched under the table. Who paid you? His smile thinned. You still think it's about money? I think you don't do this kind of damage for pride alone. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. I met them during my second year, the ones who really run the logistics, not thugs, not dealers, businessmen, architects of supply. They don't need to sell drugs. They sell silence, routes, control. It's all about infrastructure. And you joined them? I partnered with them. For every raid that went wrong, we saved a dozen people from being caught in the crossfire. We negotiated neutral zones, avoided escalation. Bureau tactics burned villages to get to one house. I offered alternatives. You betrayed the oath. I upgraded it. I sat back, stunned by the clarity in his voice. He believed it. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't panicked. He was content. He thought he was the hero. I opened the next folder in the file. Wire transfers, photos, call logs. But the last page, the one I almost hadn't printed, was a grainy CCTV still from an underground parking lot 2 weeks before Jacob's death. Thorne, talking to a man. That man had been flagged in a recent CIA intel drop, codename Hollow Finch, a financial handler tied to the Valmora inner ring. I slid the photo across to him. He didn't even flinch. He offered you status? Thorne nodded. He offered me freedom. I stared at him. You were already free. He laughed. No, Elena. You think this badge made you free? You've been playing their game, their system, their legacy. I stepped outside of it, and when I did, they listened. You helped target a task force your own people were serving on. I helped redirect a war that was burning itself alive. Jacob died. For the first time, his jaw tightened. I didn't know he was assigned there. He stopped. I didn't want him to be collateral. Collateral? That word left my lips like poison. He lowered his head slightly. I liked Jacob. So did I said. He believed in the system, even when it didn't believe in us. The weight in the room shifted. He knew what I meant. We'd both been shut out once, but only one of us turned that into treason. I stood up. You're going to be charged under the Espionage Act. Conspiracy, obstruction, unauthorized access of classified systems, and if I have anything to do with it, accessory to murder. He didn't blink. Make sure they remember who caught me, he said. That'll make your file bulletproof. I looked at him one last time. You were one of us, I said. He smiled. No, I was always something else. I just stopped pretending. I stepped out of the room and shut the door behind me. Murray stood in the hall. Well? He thinks he's a revolutionary, I said, voice low. Most traitors do. He's not afraid. He will be. We walked back toward the elevator. He named no other agents, I added. We'll find them, now that we know where to look. The hallway felt colder now, but my head was clear, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was no longer fighting to be seen. I was the one watching, and they should have known better, because I never missed a pattern. And now, I was just getting started. The headlines came fast. FBI analyst exposed as internal mole. Cartel connections confirmed. Sinclair-led task force uncovers deep internal breach. Ghost in the Bureau. Operation Frostline holds, despite betrayal. I read the articles once, then I deleted every notification from my phone. The only thing I couldn't delete was the image. Thorne's face in that freezing interrogation room, too calm, too proud, as if betrayal had simply been another job description. He had handed over lives like they were data packets. Clean, dispassionate, necessary, he said. Even now, I could hear his voice. I helped redirect a war. He never once said sorry, and maybe that was what haunted me most. Because as I sat at my desk 3 days after the final arrest, alone in the analyst wing, while most of the bureau was still reeling from the leak, I realized something I wasn't ready to admit. I had once wanted to be like him. Not the traitor, but the voice no one ignored. He got what I never had: attention, leverage, command, because he took it by force. And I'd clawed it out with clean fingers and bitten tongue. Now everyone knew my name. Now everyone looked when I walked into a room. And I hated that it had taken Jacob's death and Thorne's betrayal to get there. The ache never left my chest. I was back in Washington, back in the job, but pieces of me were still buried in that flag-draped funeral, in the second pew where my mother sobbed and my father refused to meet my eyes. The man who used to say, "Real police work happens on the street," now had to live with the fact that his daughter, the one he called just a dispatcher, had saved that entire funeral from becoming a cartel reconnaissance mission, that she had led the operation that flushed out a federal leak and brought down 3 inner-circle informants, that she had done it all while he looked the other way. On the 5th day after the bust, I got a message from him. It wasn't a call, just a text. "Your mother wants to know if you'll come by the house this weekend. We're doing a small memorial dinner. You don't have to. Just," she asked. I stared at the screen for a full minute. It didn't say, "I'm sorry." It didn't say, "I'm proud of you." But it also didn't say, "Stay away." It was the closest thing to an olive branch he'd ever offered. So I went. Not because I needed to. Because I needed to know what he would do when he saw me now. Not as the child he dismissed, but as the agent who broke his illusion. The house hadn't changed. Same flag out front. Same creaky step on the porch. But when he opened the door, he didn't look the same. His shoulders slouched more now. His eyes held something I couldn't name, a hollow mixed with shame. He stepped back to let me in without a word. Mom was in the kitchen. She hugged me so tightly I nearly dropped the wine I brought. She didn't ask how I was. She just said, "I've been following the news," and wiped at her eyes. There were photos of Jacob on every surface: childhood, academy, badge ceremony, even a shot of the 2 of us at a county fair when we were kids. He had cotton candy in one hand and was shielding me with the other like someone twice his age. That photo gutted me. Dinner was quiet: chicken and rice, bread rolls, a salad that went untouched. No one brought up Thorne. No one brought up the funeral. But just as I was reaching for the pitcher of water, my father cleared his throat. "We never saw it coming," he said. I didn't answer. "We thought he was one of us." Still, I said nothing. Then finally, soft, almost broken, he added, "We thought we knew who the good ones were." I looked up. His face was red. His hands were trembling. But he forced himself to meet my gaze. "I thought I knew." I set the pitcher down. "You didn't want to know." He flinched. "You wanted the world to stay simple. Blue versus bad. Streets versus strategy. Anyone not in uniform didn't count." "I was wrong," he said. Not loudly, not proudly, but fully. "I didn't see you. Not the way I should have." A long silence. Then I asked, "Do you now?" He nodded. "I see you, Elena." He paused, then added, "And I see Jacob in you." That hurt more than anything, because Jacob had seen me all along. He'd said I'd outrank them one day, said not to forget the little people, said Dad would come around, and now he was gone, and Dad had no choice but to catch up. He wasn't apologizing for the past. He was grieving that he'd wasted so much of it. After dinner, we walked to the back porch. The air was cooler now, the same spot where Jacob and I once caught fireflies, where I'd once tried to explain criminal profiling to my father, and where he'd once laughed and said, That's good for TV shows, not for real work." Now we stood side by side in the dark. He cleared his throat again. "I read the reports," he said. "Which ones?" "All of them." My chest tightened. He turned to me. "I had no idea you were involved in that many cases, that you were that central." "I wasn't allowed to tell you." "I know. Still," he paused. "You changed everything." "No," I said. "You just finally noticed." He didn't argue, didn't try to reclaim authority. He just let the truth sit between us. And for once, he didn't need to be the one holding the badge, because now he knew mine carried weight too. When I returned to D.C., the first thing I noticed was how quiet everything had become. Not in the physical sense. The Bureau was still buzzing with post-breach containment procedures, media mitigation, internal reviews. But people moved around me differently now, like they were unsure whether to salute or apologize. Some would meet my eyes in the hallway with a hesitant smile, the kind that said, "I always knew you were sharp, but not like this." Others ducked their heads entirely, perhaps recalling the times they'd dismissed my input or cut me off mid-briefing. Even in my own task force, I could feel the shift. The silence wasn't cold anymore. It was cautious. And then it became something stranger. Admiration. Agent Quinn, who once rolled his eyes when I corrected a behavioral map, now waited outside my office with 2 fresh coffees and an offer to collaborate on a high-tier gang analysis. He called it cross-functional synergy. I called it irony. Another agent, Carter, field guy, loud, tough, I don't read reports unless they're laminated, left a note on my desk that read simply, "Hell of a takedown. If you ever want to teach a seminar, I'll sit front row." They meant well, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like being seen after you've already bled. The director requested a closed-door debrief within a week, just me, Murray, and 3 other senior officers. I expected scrutiny. Instead, I got questions like, "How did you spot him before forensics did?" And "How would you restructure internal firewalls moving forward?" As if I'd been preparing my whole life to lead change. I hadn't. I'd just been preparing to survive. Still, I answered everything cleanly, precisely. I laid out recommendations, walked them through behavioral modeling gaps, and proposed a new 2-tier cross-check system for project oversight, one that wouldn't rely on title, but on data transparency. By the time the meeting ended, one of the deputy directors stood and said, "You know, Sinclair, you're not just a damn good analyst. You're leadership material." I nodded politely. Inside, I felt nothing, because it wasn't a compliment. It was a delay. A late train arriving after the station had emptied. The media, meanwhile, had begun to run its own narrative. The quiet agent who brought down a cartel leak. FBI's shadow watcher, Agent Elena Sinclair, breaks silence. From dispatcher's niece to national hero. I hated that one the most, because even now they got it wrong. I was never just a niece, and I was never silent. I was ignored. There's a difference, but the world loves a headline, and I wasn't about to waste energy fighting spin. I gave one internal interview for the Bureau's classified interagency journal, and only because I knew Jacob would have wanted it. In it, I talked about patterns, about why betrayal doesn't always show up as malice. Sometimes it wears the face of someone who once held the door open for you. Sometimes it speaks in the voice of a friend. One evening, a week later, I got a message request on my Bureau terminal. It was encrypted. No subject. The sender's ID pinged from a prison server. I hesitated, but then I opened it. "They're still inside, Elena. I wasn't the only one. You're good, but not done. Keep watching. You'll know them when they blink at the wrong line of code. RT." I stared at the screen. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a threat. It was a puzzle. and he knew I couldn't ignore it, because he knew how I worked. Murray called me 30 minutes later. "You got it too?" he asked. I nodded, then remembered he couldn't see me. "Yeah." "He's not wrong." "I know." "You think he's bluffing?" "No," I said. "I think he's still playing a game, one he started a long time ago, and I think we've only scraped the top." Murray exhaled. "I'll authorize a quiet sweep of the project log metadata. You can choose your team." I already had names in mind. Not the loud ones, not the ones who smiled the hardest at my hallway promotions, the watchers, the ones who saw quietly, like I once did. That weekend, I visited Jacob's grave for the first time since the ceremony. I brought 2 things, a folded bureau flag and his old explorer's badge, the one he got when he was 13, beaming with pride because Dad said it made him official. I placed both down, and then I sat in the grass for a long time. I talked to him, told him everything, about Thorne, about Dad, about the look on Rivera's face when I was called Agent Sinclair in front of the entire precinct. And then, finally, I told him about me. "I don't think I'll ever get used to this," I said aloud. "The feeling that I was invisible for so long, and now I'm on every screen." A breeze rustled the trees. I closed my eyes. "It's not the spotlight I mind, Jake. It's that it took losing you to earn it." Somewhere behind me, a hawk cried in the distance. I stood and whispered the words he used to say to me before I left for school each morning. "They don't see you yet, but they will." He was right. And now that they had, I wasn't going back. I wasn't shrinking. And I wasn't silent anymore. 6 weeks after Thorne's arrest, I stood before a sea of new agents. Quantico's auditorium was packed. Nearly 200 fresh faces, eager and wide-eyed, notebooks open, badges still gleaming with newness. They called this session Legacy Leadership. I was supposed to talk about Operation Frostline, about resilience, about watching your own. But what I really wanted to tell them was this, that silence has a texture, and sometimes it feels like home, until you realize you've been living under it, not inside it. They introduced me formally. Special Agent Elena Sinclair, Lead Tactical Analyst, Task Force Frostline. The title sounded foreign in the speaker's voice, like it belonged to someone else, someone older, someone more put together than I felt inside. But I walked up to the podium anyway, because if there's one thing I learned in the past 3 months, it's this. You don't have to feel ready to be real. You just have to show up. I cleared my throat and spoke without notes. I used to sit in rooms like this, I began, usually in the back, usually silent. People thought I was taking notes. I was actually mapping escape routes. That's what happens when you've spent your life calculating how to stay small enough not to offend anyone. A few nervous laughs. I let the pause linger. But then something happens, I continued. Someone dies. Someone lies. Someone tries to bury the truth under a technicality. And suddenly the silence doesn't feel like protection anymore. It feels like betrayal. The room was still. Good. They were listening. I didn't catch the Frostline leak because I had better tech. I caught it because I knew what it meant to be overlooked. And once you've lived under that long enough, you can smell the shape of deception, even when it looks like a friend. I paused, then added quietly, and even when it wears the same badge. They didn't flinch. They nodded, because they were the new class, and they'd entered a bureau that now bore scars. They were here after the breach, after the headlines, and many of them had likely chosen this path because of what they'd read about me. The reluctant symbol, the unexpected name, the woman who once got pushed to the end of her brother's funeral pew and ended up leading the most successful internal takedown in 5 years. I don't want you to remember my rank, I told them. I want you to remember what it cost, and then ask yourselves, Is being seen more important than being honest? Because I promise you, the second you have to choose, you'll learn who you really are. I stepped down from the podium to a standing ovation. I didn't smile, not because I wasn't grateful, but because Jacob should have been in the front row. Later that night, I sat alone in my office, watching the recording of the lecture. I didn't normally rewatch myself, but I needed to understand what they were seeing when they looked at me now. It wasn't polish, it wasn't rank, it was purpose and pain. They could see both. There was a knock on the door. Murray entered holding a manila envelope. "They finally did it," he said. "What?" "Clearance level 5, full security access. Director signed it this morning." He handed me the envelope. My credentials, upgraded. My classification level, elevated. My project autonomy, expanded. "You're officially one of the few," he added. "Welcome to the glass ceiling after it's been shattered." I stared at the folder. Is this what it's supposed to feel like? What? Validation. Murray sat across from me. "No," he said. "Validation feels like sugar. This is earned weight." I nodded slowly. "Will it get easier?" "No," he replied honestly, "but you'll get stronger." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, one more thing. That burner Thorne mentioned in his message, we tracked it. And? Still active. Just pinged near Philly 2 nights ago, but encrypted tight. Couldn't crack it." "Did it message anyone?" He nodded. "One transmission." "To who?" He looked at me evenly. "To you." He left the room without another word. I opened my secure terminal. The message was waiting. One line. "You think it ends with me, Elena? Look inside your own chain. It's not done." No name, no return trace. But the timing wasn't random. The battle wasn't over. And maybe it never would be. I closed the screen, then leaned back in my chair and whispered the words Jacob used to tell me when I doubted everything. "You already know what to do." Yes, I did. I always had. I stared at the screen for a long time after that message. Look inside your own chain. It's not done. A challenge. A warning. A game. But above all, an invitation. Thorne may have been locked away, but what he left behind still pulsed like a phantom limb in the Bureau's body. His leak was just a vein. The infection, I was beginning to realize, ran deeper. I pulled up the internal assignment database and filtered for transfer requests within the last 90 days, the kind of requests agents don't broadcast. Lateral moves, departmental shifts, reassignment to task forces with minimal oversight. 3 names surfaced. One of them I recognized, barely. A systems liaison who once offered to optimize my network access mid-frost line. I declined. Now he was posted to a low-surveillance narcotics desk in Ohio. A dead zone. I flagged it. Not to accuse, but to watch. Because that was the thing no one tells you about earning power. It doesn't just give you answers. It gives you the burden of knowing where to look for the ones nobody wants found. 2 weeks later, I was offered a promotion. Deputy Director of Analytical Operations. Big office, bigger team, oversight of all East Coast tactical intelligence hubs. It was everything I was supposed to want. Everything my father would have clinked glasses to. I asked for 48 hours to consider. Then I drove to Jacob's grave. This time I didn't bring anything. No flag, no letter, no token of success, just the truth. "I don't want it," I said aloud, voice steady. I could take it. God knows they'd love the headline. But that office would keep me too far from where things actually break. The wind answered in silence. I crouched down beside the headstone and brushed away a dried leaf. "I know what you'd say, that I earned it, that I should take it just to prove I could. But you and I both know I didn't do this for a plaque. My fingers curled into the grass. I want to stay close to the pattern. I want to build something that doesn't depend on broken systems finally recognizing what they should have known all along. I stood slowly, brushing the dirt from my coat. You always said I'd outrank them one day. I think I finally understand what you meant. That Sunday, I turned down the promotion. Officially, I cited strategic focus realignment. Unofficially, I started my own team. Small, independent, bureau-sanctioned, but off the public grid. Operation Inkwatch. Our mission? Identify pattern anomalies in interagency behavior before they become breaches. We didn't wait for leaks to spill. We watched the ripples before they surfaced. And I staffed it with agents like me, analysts who saw more than they were told to, officers who'd been overlooked for being too quiet, too bookish, too outside the mold. We weren't flashy, but we were precise. The director raised an eyebrow at my proposal. "You want to build a department full of ghosts?" I smiled. "No, sir, I want to build one full of mirrors." He approved it. And then, for the first time in my career, I chose my own title, Commander of Predictive Threat Intelligence, Elena Sinclair, CPTI. Not because I needed the initials, but because I needed the freedom to define what they meant. A month after we launched, I visited my father. He was in the garage, polishing the same old revolver he'd retired with, the same one he once said would outlast the bureaucracy. He looked up when he saw me. "You're not in a suit," he said. "Didn't feel like wearing one." He nodded slowly. "You know, when I joined the force, I thought all the bad guys wore masks." He set the revolver down. "I didn't realize some of them wore neckties." I leaned against the workbench beside him. "I've learned the same thing. The difference is, now I have the tools to see through both." He picked up a photo on the bench, a faded shot of him, Jacob, and me at a 4th of July parade. Jacob had a plastic badge. I had a sparkler. "You were always watching," he murmured. "I was always being told to sit still." He looked at me then, really looked. "I told your mother last week, if I'd had half your clarity when I wore the badge, I might have actually done some good." I put a hand on his shoulder. "You did what you knew. Now we do more." He nodded. A silent peace settled between us. Not perfect, but honest. The last thing I did before leaving was hang a photo in the center of our new command center. It was Jacob, not in uniform, not on duty, but smiling at a barbecue, holding a soda, and laughing so hard his eyes were nearly closed. Below it, I had a small plaque engraved. "The ones who see us before the world does, they're the reason we keep going." That's what legacy really is. Not medals, not headlines, but the people who held the mirror until you saw yourself clearly. And now, it's our job to hold that mirror for someone else. Because somewhere out there, there's another Elena, tucked in the back row, watching everything and waiting to be seen. And we won't let her wait alone anymore.